It's been almost 80 years since nukes were used at the end of World War II, and humanity has enjoyed a nuclear weapon-free existence since, which is a good thing, right? It's a good thing it's been 80 years. It's not to say that nukes may or may never be used by anyone. The entire point behind the team that created the nuclear weapons was to create something so horrible that no one would ever want to use one again. They were hoping to bring about a new era of world peace, right? These weapons are so horrible. How could anyone ever dare want to use one, right? And in some sense, they're right. They didn't bring apart an era of world peace, but they did create a stalemate, and we've seen that stalemate last for generations since the invention of the nuclear weapon, since the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? We have Cold Wars, we have arms races, we have massive nuclear proliferation, but they haven't gone off, right? No one has actually dared to use one. So in that sense, that was the point, right? Humanity has developed so many other methods and horrible means to destroy each other. You haven't seen nuclear weapons come into play, right? And I'm certainly hoping they never do. Hope we never get to that point. It's really held as a last resort, right? You see countries saying, hey, if you invade us, if we hit an existential threat to our existence, then yes, we will use nuclear weapons. But anything short of that, no, we're not going to use them, because they know if they use them, other people are going to use them. And everything gets really ugly really quickly if the nukes start going off, right? Despite that, despite the stalemate, when you look at the Doomsday clock, if you follow that, it was moved forward to 96 seconds to midnight, January 23rd, 2023, which is the closest it's been. And the idea of the Doomsday clock is to measure how safe the world is. So it's basically a measure of how likely we are to see some kind of doomsday event. Generally, it would be tracking nuclear war, right? And something to note, if nukes were used, it would unlikely be what you see in the movies of a full-on exchange between the U.S. and Russia, whereby nukes, hundreds if not thousands of nuclear weapons are detonated. It would more likely be a smaller strike. Or even potential accidental or unauthorized launch, right? Those could certainly happen. There's been different points throughout history where there were almost accidental launches, or nuclear terrorism. That's always been the fear, certainly coming out of the 80s and the 90s, the idea of a dirty bomb or a suitcase nuclear bomb. You don't hear about that as much anymore. There's a lot of myths, there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of bad information around the types of what you'd expect from a nuclear explosion, perpetrated by Hollywood, apocalypse fiction. Maybe they know, maybe they don't care in terms of what would really happen. Unless you're an apocalypse nerd like me, you probably wouldn't know. So, recommending this book, Nuclear War Survival Skills. This is Crescent and Kearney, and in it he lays out some myths and facts around nuclear explosions, and I wanted to jump into some of those and kind of go through them. What are some actual realities? What are some common myths around what would happen if a nuclear weapon were to explode, and what would actually happen, right? And the first myth I pulled out is radioactive fallout. Not to say fallout's a myth, but the myth around it is fallout radiation from nuclear war would poison the air and all parts of the environment. It would kill everyone. If a nuke goes off, it's going to spray fallout into the air, and it would kill everybody and everything. And the first part of that is true. It would spray fallout into the air, right? If a nuclear weapon detonated near the ground, you would expect a big explosion. A big explosion means a big crater. Thousands of pounds of dirt would go up into the air. Those particles, trillions of little particles scattering into the wind, would become radioactive because of the atomic nature of the nuclear weapon, the atomic particles, right? Would turn all those little bits of dust into radioactive fallout. So a giant cloud of dust becomes radioactive fallout. So depending on the weather, right? If there's no wind at all, it's not going to carry it as far, but depending on the weather, the particles could be carried quite a vast distance, and that, of course, is the fear with nuclear fallout, is the wind's going to blow it everywhere, and there's going to be radioactive particles raining down on the whole world, and that's where we start getting into the myth size. So there's going to be, as you would expect, larger particles, can't really show size of a small particle, large particles and small particles. Large particles aren't going to carry as far as the small particles, and most of the more dangerous particles are going to fall within the first few miles and fall within the first few hours, right? And certainly not to say nuclear explosion wouldn't kill you if you're close. What we're talking about is the fallout that spreads across the world, and it certainly would spread across the world. The smaller particles could be carried for thousands of miles and stay up in the air for an exceptionally long time, which is actually an advantage on the small particles. So the concentration of particles large enough to cause major concern will likely be deposited within the first few hours of a nuclear explosion. Smaller particles, which could be inhaled easily, could remain airborne for weeks before reaching the ground. But by that time, radioactive decay and the fact they're so scattered would make them much less dangerous. So, yes, particles would be scattered all over the world. No, they wouldn't be as dangerous, right? So there's radioactive decay, and we'll get into that a little bit, right? So you have the larger particles, those are going to fall closer, those are going to fall faster. Within 8 hours of a nuclear explosion, the particles that came out of the crater, the dust, the radioactive particles, lose about 90% of their lethality, right? So if it was at 1,000, it goes down to 100 rads, right? 7 hours later, it drops another 50%. So within 14 hours, we've gone from 1,000 rads to 100 rads to below 50 rads. And then within 48 hours, it drops another 80%. So now we're at 10 rads. So within 48 hours, you've gone from 1,000 rads down to 10 rads, right, in this scenario. So something that had a radioactive value of 1,000 rads would be down to 10 rads per hour. After 48 hours, would be down to down to 10 rads within 48 hours. I want to get it right here. And 1 rad within 2 weeks. So within 2 weeks, something that was 1,000 rads. And that's the level of radiation. You don't want the radiation in your body, but you go from 1,000 to down to 1 within 2 weeks. So within 2 weeks of the explosion going off, the particles would start losing their radioactive effects very quickly. So if you had shelter, certainly you'd want to take shelter if there's a nuclear explosion, even if the shelter is just in your house, right? Maybe we'll talk a little bit about shelters. I know we've done some videos on it in the past, but certainly you want to be in shelter. But you figure within 2 weeks, right? Even if you're close, not next to, we're not talking within the blast area of an explosion, within a few weeks, the actual level of background radiation would be reduced significantly. And of course, the book points out a good note that maybe people don't realize is human bodies can in fact repair most low-dose radiation damage over time. There are certainly lethal levels of radiation, but if you're only experiencing low doses of radiation, your body can heal some of that over time. So myth number 1 is what we're going to cover on this one, and maybe I'll do some follow-ups, hit some more of the myths, but the idea that radiation, radioactive decay, nuclear explosion, fallout would wipe out the Earth, not so much. I mean, it would be pretty bad in the beginning. It would be bad if you're close to the explosion, but in terms of particles going everywhere, the smaller they are, the longer they'll be in the air, and the longer in the air, the less dangerous they become, right? You certainly wouldn't want to breathe them in, but it's maybe not as bad, right? I hate to say that, right? My point is not to say don't be afraid of nuclear war, but certainly not as bad as it might seem. So, as always, guys, hope that helps out. Thank you for watching, and we appreciate you.